Chapter 81 Extraordinary Event 1 Yong-ho's. Yong-ho's decision was as fast and simple as always. Let's go back. Catalina pricked her ears. Chwiryong regrettably put down the catalogue of the free auction house she was reading earnestly, but she did not object because he was right. The resonance between the sins was confirmed. Moreover, the King of Fury was staying in the auction house. It was highly likely that the King of Fury did not recognize that Yong-ho was the King of Greed. However, it was just a probability. If the king ran into him again, he might think differently this time. The King of Gluttony. It was the King of Gluttony that Yong-ho had to avoid more than the King of Fury. The King of Gluttony had already participated in the auction, wearing a ghost mask. Even at this moment, it was highly likely that the king might be rummaging through the catalogues somewhere in the auction house. We gained a lot here, didn't we? Well, that's correct, but pouting her lips, Chwiryong pulled Catalina's tail, who was sitting next to her. Flinching a bit, Catalina hurriedly glanced at Yong-ho for help, but he ignored it, pretending not to have noticed it because he found her frowning cutely rather than trying to. Check Chwiryong's mood. Although Yong-ho's party didn't buy anything at the auction house, they gained a lot, like Yong-ho said. Yong-ho learned about the resonance between the sins and recognized the feelings of the King of Fury and the King of Gluttony. Now he could recognize the two anytime, anywhere. Yong-ho also confirmed the growth of his power. He could roughly size up his place in the demon world. Well, Chwiryong had an opportunity to meet Citri here. Nodding at once, he looked towards Citri without hesitation. Well at ease, Citri said. Are you going to leave right away? No, I may encounter them on the way to the carriage. Let me leave when the main auction ends. It was obvious that he would be noticed if he left in the middle of the auction. Citri smiled softly, as if she liked his answer. What a good judgment befitting my dear client. Okay, let's do that. After pausing for a moment, she got up from her seat and approached Chwiryong and Catalina. Cute client, do you have any item you really want to have? Citri, Chwiryong asked in confusion. It wasn't because of her question. It was because she could infer a certain fact from her question. Citri sat next to Chwiryong and pointed at herself elegantly. I'm going to stay here at the auction house. I can meet and talk with Samael. As you know, I'm a big shot of this dungeon market. Citri was not from the Mammon family, so she had no reason to go back with them. Even if she stayed here and encountered the king, she would have no problem at all. Oh, of course, it doesn't mean that I'm going to give you a free gift. I'm going to get it back from my dear client. Of course, you don't have to pay for my service. Citri again drew their attention to the auction items. Chwiryong and Catalina looked at Yong-ho before responding right away. Yong-ho approved with a nod. Choose it one by one. Chwiryong yelled in delight quietly and opened the catalogue. Then she pointed to one item. Okay, let me choose this one. It was the devil's nails that she had been fidgeting with at the free auction house. Slightly narrowing her eyes, Citri said, you have to get close to the other person and even hurt him with this. But the more demanding the conditions are, the stronger the curse becomes. Sounds like a good choice. You agree, right? As if she was happy about Citri siding with her, Chwiryong was so excited. Catalina, who was waiting for her turn nervously, also opened the catalogue. I want this one. It was a pendant in the shape of a ghost face. It was impressive because it was grey like a piece of plaster. It's an item that strengthens the attributes of darkness. I think this is also a very good thing for our escort night girl, but she blurred at the end of her words, then turned her eyes at Yong-ho. With her shoulders drooping, she said, as if to blame him a bit. Dear client, I just wonder what the hell you did to these beautiful ladies because they wanted only combat tools like this. As you know, there are lots of beautiful accessories here too. Chwiryong just grinned at that, while Catalina signaled to Citri with her eyes that he didn't do anything wrong to her. Instead of making any excuses, Yong-ho read her thoughts and said duly, Citri, can I have one, too? Don't beat around the bush. Please answer me. A little smile was on her face. He spoke without opening the catalogue like Catalina or Chwiryong. Not all items for auction here were displayed in the catalogue. I would like to obtain a wizard-based familiar spirit capable of necromancing. What, don't you want an elf spirit? Citri laughed heartily again. She replied by burying his back on the sofa. Great. If you can't get one at this auction, I'll recommend one from the Dungeon Market catalog. Maybe you like the Undead series, right? Like Lich, well, yes, as long as I have the funds. The combination of Death Knight and Lich, which he had been longing for a long time. Even if it was impossible, the necromancer was useful in many ways. It was a familiar spirit that was worth obtaining even with more money than expected. At that moment, there rang the soft bell. Citri wriggled her charming eyebrows at the sound echoing from quite a distance. It's time for the main auction to start. Shall we move now? Citri reached out to Yong-ho without getting up. Then Kaiwan pulled Catalina's tail to make her sit down again, who was about to get up casually, then looked at Yong-ho like Citri did. Let's go. For peace in the family, Yong-ho did not escort anybody, and Citri burst into laughter. It's impossible he went back already. Although the soft ringing of the bell was beautiful, she didn't feel that way. Yacha woman Ketimuka, who was the right-hand woman and friend of Dhritarashtra, King of Fury, looked around again sharply. She could not find the man with the lion mask anywhere in the auction house. No problem, Ketimuka. I just ran into him by chance anyway, but you still. Ketimuka bit her lower lip and looked down at her master, King of Fury. Although she couldn't see her master's expression because of that ugly ghost mask, obviously she must have been quite disappointed. Just a few minutes ago, she looked around more earnestly than Ketimuka. Ketimuka felt really regrettable about it. Of course, she didn't really expect anything from the masked man. Although Ketimuka teased her by saying she fell in love with him at first sight, it was just nonsense in the first place. What Ketimuka wished was just her master's slight deviation from her daily routines. She just wanted her master to get clear of the mess for a moment because she was overly concerned about everything due to her thoughtful and warm-hearted personality. In other words, all she wanted was just a little happening that could make her master reminisce over it with a smile. Finally, even the bell stopped ringing. Shortly afterward, the main auction began. Those who were talking to each other in the dark auction house stopped talking to each other and fixed their eyes on the stage. Let me get out for some fresh air. If they auction Soma or Amrita, you must buy it. The King of Fury acted exactly the opposite. After telling her attendant not to follow her, the king left the auction house. No, he is not here either. She rolled her eyes again on her way out, but she could not see him. The King of Fury pouted her lips. It seemed that she was unconsciously expecting to meet him again a lot. Well, he made me feel better anyway. She did murmur it just to comfort herself. When she came out to the balcony and breathed in the cold night air, she felt like that before she knew it. When did she think of a man like this for the last time? Wasn't it the first time since she admired the magnificent figure of the King of Fury when she first saw him as a child? The more she thought about it, the funnier she felt about her own behavior before the start of this auction. She could not understand why she was disappointed not to see him again. The King of Fury took off her mask. It was the rule to use a mask in the auction house. But since everyone entered the auction house to participate in the main auction anyway, she didn't have to worry. Her white, soft cheeks protected under the mask were exposed to the cold night air. She felt even refreshed because of the cold sensation on her skin. When she returned after the auction was over, she would be faced with an extreme confrontation. She had to bide her time, watching closely how the battle in the north unfolds, or how the King of Gluttony acted. It was something she really hated. She wished they just started a war. Oh no, what am I thinking now? Take it easy, Dhritarashtra. You can kill so many innocent people just to satisfy your frustration. Rebuking herself like that, she got the complicated thoughts out of her mind and looked up at the night sky. Her heart was pounding. Chapter 1A2. Extraordinary Event 2. She blinked her eyes. At that moment, a flying wagon pulled by 6 Pegasus horses soared into the sky. It was fully reflected in the King of Fury's eyes. It wasn't like the King of Flight slightly passing over the balcony. She was at some distance from the carriage. But this woman, the King of Gandharva and the King of Fury, was possessed of extraordinary physical skills. She looked at the carriage and noticed the face of the person looking out the wagon window. She made eye contact with him. It was a very brief moment. His greenish-black eyes, black hair, and well-defined features. The Pegasus flew up, and the flying carriage quickly faded away. Naturally, the man's face was also out of her sight, and again, a few seconds passed. The King of Fury raised her hand and pressed her chest hard. Her heart was still pounding, though not as hard as she first saw him. Startled by her own reaction, she was embarrassed. Even before she knew it, she said clearly, "Oh my, did I really fall for him?" At that moment, her cheeks blushed quickly. At the same time, there was a loud noise from behind her back. "Master! Master! Is it Kurtimuka?" Wearing the mask again hurriedly, the King of Fury turned back. Kurtimuka took off her mask, contrary to the King of Fury. She said with a rigid expression, "By heavens!" It was when only the first item was listed for sale after the main auction began. However, the King of Gluttony left the auction house. The King of Gluttony was chewing the bones of the small devil imp that delivered him urgent news. Still, he could not suppress his anger. Although he was patient enough normally, there was something like the last straw for him. Once he got upset, he could not calm down easily. The beauties of the King of Gluttony shuddered for fear that they would be eaten, too. Eating man was by no means taboo to the King of Gluttony. As soon as he arrived in front of the huge wagon that could be called a moving palace, the Apsaras moved quickly. They hurriedly moved the food stocked in the wagon to the table. The King of Gluttony devoured the food ravenously. He even chewed the plates and twisted the neck of one of the poor Apsaras in the end. The rest of Apsaras struggled to refrain from screaming. Even with trembling hands, they carried food more hurriedly. They were grateful that the woman who just breathed with them a moment ago was not eaten alive. It was so miserable. The king of the unclaimed land, the fruit was ripe. The fruit that absorbed various nutrients must be truly sweet. If the fruit was truly greed, it couldn't be better. Even if it wasn't greed, it was worth eating if it was the king of the unclaimed land. So, the King of Gluttony thought about the harvest. Once his schedule at the auction house was over, he was going to prepare to attack the southern land. But everything was messed up now. It wasn't because of the king of the unclaimed land. If the king had taken measures to protect himself, the King of Fury would not have been as angry as he was now. The king of the unclaimed land in the south was the one he hated most, as well as a pain in the neck. The King of Gluttony broke the long silence. He deployed the troops to the borders with the southern land. The king who didn't possess the sin. Nevertheless, he was a monster that succeeded the throne of a king, and he was the most powerful dragon in the demon world. The king of violence. Finally, he moved. He messed with the king of gluttonous occupation plan. Since the times of Mammon, the great king of greed, those kings who ruled the demon world had always had their own names after the sins: pride, envy, lust, gluttony, fury, and sloth. They could not avoid getting away from such names, because none of them who didn't possess the sin could obtain the power and forces strong enough to be called a king. It was an old, unwritten rule. It was a sacrosanct fact that nobody could dare to ignore. However, there was a man who denied that fact totally. He didn't possess the sin, but his strength was comparable to those kings with the sin. His forces were more than enough for him to build a kingdom on his own. He was the owner with the largest build in the demon world, as well as the most powerful mana in the demon world. The kings were pleased with his presence. The king of envy declared that his very existence was a blasphemy against the kings. Other kings expressed sympathy for his declaration. The demon world was a place where the law of the jungle ruled. Power meant justice in the demon world. Finally, one of the kings rose up in revolt. He started a war to punish this man who was called a king, even though he didn't possess a sin. The former king of gluttony, also known as the King of Flies, he attacked the territory of a nameless king with a legion of several millions of locusts. Their attack was so overwhelming that it seemed to destroy the whole demon world. Not only the kings, but also various lords of the demon world expected Beelzebub's victory. But the results betrayed everyone's expectations. Beelzebub was ridiculously defeated. The army of colored dragons that ruled the sky and the earth destroyed the army of gluttony, made up of locusts. Beelzebub was killed by the nameless king. Thanks to the mana he released as a last desperate resort, he didn't lose the sin of gluttony and godly energy to this nameless king. But that was it. The news about Beelzebub's defeat shook the entire demonic world. Given that the man who didn't possess the sin defeated those kings with the sins soundly, it was only natural that the whole demon world was shocked. It was an extremely extraordinary event that the demon world had never experienced during the past thousands of years. By now, the whole demon world had no choice but to recognize the victor. It was only secondary for the kings with the sins who didn't like him to approve of his existence. The nameless king got a name of his own. There was only one name suitable for him, who smashed the king of gluttony and his army with overwhelming power. The king of violence. The demon world called him so, and other kings eventually recognized his existence. And that happened more than 200 years ago. For more than 200 years since then, the king of violence had remained silent. He never left his land. Even when he defeated Beelzebub and his army, he did not cross the borders. A new king of gluttony and the king of fury emerged. The king of pride also succeeded his predecessor. Even during this turbulent period, the king of violence alone stood tall like a mountain. At that time, the king of gluttony thought that when the fighting in the north reached its peak, the king of violence would also be his rival. To him, the king of violence was only a variable. Even the king of gluttony, who was the wariest among the 6 kings of the king of violence, did not think the latter would intervene in the war among the other kings. But the king of violence moved, contrary to their expectations. He ordered the army of colorful dragons to advance, as if to scorn at their evaluation and guesswork. Of course, he didn't start a war. The legion of dragons was still within the territory of the violent king. He only deployed his troops at the borders with the territory of the king of gluttony. But even that was a big threat to the king of gluttony, who had never seen such a gathering of his troops along the border in the last 200 years. Upon hearing Chwiryong's report, the king of fury blinked her big eyes. Though momentarily she wondered whether Chwiryong, her faithful friend and loyal subordinate, made a reckless joke. Her report was so shocking to the king of fury. "Did you say the king of violence really moved his troops?" she asked again to confirm it. Chwiryong nodded fervently. "Yes, that's right. A legion of dragons gathered on the border with the territory of the king of gluttony. Oh my God. It really makes you feel the goosebumps to hear the news about their gathering." Chwiryong shuddered, then approached the king of fury a little closer and activated the golden bracelet on her arm. Then a small image unfolded in the air above the bracelet. It was a scene of her troops patrolling the borders. Dozens of dragons covered the sky and the ground. Thousands or tens of thousands of monsters under the control of the dragons were with them, so their menacing posture was terrifying. The king of fury took a deep breath. Even though she knew that the legion of dragons was heading for the king of gluttony, a cold sweat broke out on her back. "Master, the king of violence is our ally, right?" Chapter 1-3. Extraordinary Event 3. Even Chwiryong, a valiant Yacha warrior, could not hide her fear. The king of fury nodded slowly, and even tolerated her question, which was even somewhat rude, for even the king felt scared, though for a moment. "Yes, that's right. We have a secret alliance with Uncle. There will never be any occasion for us, gods of arms, to fight the legion of dragons." The king not only reassured Chwiryong, but also herself about it. She took a deep breath to calm down. "It's okay. We'll be all right because we have an alliance with the king. Actually, Uncle helped me several times." The relationship between the king of fury and the king of violence was so good that other kings could not imagine it. That was why the king of fury called the latter uncle openly. To the king of fury, the king of violence was an adult whom she could trust and follow. He was an advisor who helped her make the right decision all the time. The king of fury bit her lips once. Because of the king of violence's reluctance to fight, she had never talked with him about politics or military affairs. Most of the advice the king of fury himself sought from him was limited to her personal matters. Nonetheless, the king of fury regarded him as an ally. She believed that he would definitely come to her rescue whenever she was involved in a war with other kings. To be honest, the king of fury had some grievances against him. How did he not inform her in advance about such a large-scale military action? No, that could not be true. Probably the king of violence had some reason for that, she thought. Maybe even at this moment, an envoy sent by the king of violence was running toward her own palace. Besides, it was a national agenda of grave importance. Even now, it was necessary for the king of fury to build a proper alliance with him based on their awkward friendship. The king of fury tapped her on the cheek lightly. Then she focused on her immediate task. The king of violence had a bad relationship with the king of gluttony. However, their relationship was rather one-sided. The king of gluttony hated the king of violence. The relationship between the two kings was usually bad in the first place, but the former showed extreme hostility to the latter. There were several rumors about their relationship. Some said they had a bad relationship because of Beelzebub, the former king of gluttony. Others said the king of gluttony didn't like the king of violence because the latter didn't possess a sin. Some also cited the inherent inferiority that the king of gluttony felt toward the king of violence as the main cause of their bad ties. The king of gluttony was originally a preta, the lowest level demon, but he was well known as a self-made king who persistently climbed to his current position through the power of the sin. On the other hand, the king of violence was powerful from his birth because he was born as a dragon, and a red dragon at that, always cited as the strongest race in the demon world. Of course, the king of gluttony was born with a sin when he was born, so he was the same as the king of violence in terms of their special birth. Nonetheless, there was a difference. For the preta, the lowest level demon, the sin was like a pearl necklace on the neck of a pig. Nobody could even imagine how much the king of gluttony suffered before climbing to the position of a king. By the way, I thought the king of violence was in a sleeping mode. No, it was the real reason why the king of violence remained silent even in the midst of the turbulent war in the north. Thanks to this, the king of fury met the king of violence in recent years. Good. I won't solve the problem by just agonizing over it anyway. Master, the king of fury again put on the ghost mask. He just did it ceremonially rather than just for any reason. As if to reassure Kirtimuka, she stretched out her hand and tapped her shoulder larger than hers. Let's go back too. I think I have to send an envoy to Uncle just in case, in going to see him. No matter what the king of gluttony was doing at the moment, he would be desperately struggling. It was clear that he wasn't going to act recklessly, but the king of violence already showed he could be unpredictable. Nobody knew whether the king of gluttony would act recklessly. Okay, I'll get ready to go back right away. Kirtimuka, who finally felt reassured by her trustworthy master's action, spoke with a nod. She hurriedly showed due manners to her master, then left the balcony to gather the servants, who were scattered throughout the auction house, and prepare a wagon. The king of fury, who was about to follow Kirtimuka, stopped. She stepped back and turned around for a moment. Yeah, later, not now. Even if it was true that her heart pounded when she saw the masked man, now wasn't the time for her to dwell on him. Since she saw his face, that was enough for now. If it was meant to be, she would see him again. The king of fury turned back again, not as an innocent virgin, but as the king of a country. She stepped forward. When the king of fury pulled herself together, Yong-ho was in agony. Did she find out my identity? He made eye contact with the king of fury. Although he was at a distance from her, he was sure she did. Why? It was when the main auction started that he saw her, so there was no particular reason for the king of fury to appear on the balcony where she could see the flying carriage clearly. Of course, there was something like coincidence that could be the reason in any situation, but there was a fat chance she came out to the balcony by chance. If the king of fury was looking for him, and as a result saw him for the second time, it was possible in the worst scenario that she might have found out that he was the king of greed. No, I hope not. It wasn't just his mere optimism. He could feel it when his eyes met hers, though very briefly. Embarrassment, surprise, heart beating fast. Dang it! Did she completely figure out my identity? If she was also confused and surprised to know that Yong-ho was the king of greed, all the puzzles would be put together to solve all the unanswered questions. I don't know, I don't think so. It's unlikely she has recognized me. Above all, the king of fury did not have the heart of the demon god. Besides, she encountered him at a longer distance than when he faced her in the past. So, it was unlikely that she might have noticed his identity. Even if she had noticed him, the king of fury would not have sat idle, just looking at him blankly in such a situation. Anyway, my visit this time paid off because I saw the bare face of the king of fury. She was a fresh and beautiful girl whose nickname Fury didn't suit her at all. Yong-ho closed his eyes and once again thought of her face. And there were two people watching Yong-ho at that moment. Oh my! He is now thinking of another woman, right? Kai-wan, watching him coldly, whispered. Catalina quickly nodded. Catalina, who had a good night vision like a dark elf, also saw the king of fury standing on the balcony. However, Since the King of Fury took off the ghost mask and Catalina saw her only momentarily, she just thought the woman was a pure beauty rather than the King of Fury. Kaiwan frowned when Catalina whispered about what she had seen. It was because she didn't like Catalina's description of the king as a fresh beauty with dark blue hair. Kaiwan again said to Catalina, "Let me try to be seductive and enchanting to him, so you should try to be innocent and pure." Got it. Hearing their conversation, Salami would have shaken its head, asking them what the shta they were talking about, but it was Catalina who listened to her seriously. Opening her eyes wide again, Catalina whispered something again. Kaiwan snorted at it by saying, "What, you're far from sexy, dang it. You must be a mixed succubus." Catalina, whose eyes grew blurry for a moment, grinned, flapping her ears and tail. Kaiwan said again, "Anyway, the point is, you shouldn't make him attracted to another woman, got it?" Catalina nodded fervently. Then she looked at Yongho sharply like Kaiwan did. The sky of the demon world was black. However, even that darkness could not completely cover the posture of the giants positioned under the pouring starlight. Dragons, perfect beings as one. Dragons were positioned there as a group. As a legion of dragons, they watched the land of the king of gluttony. The king of violence was not with his dragon army. He was stuck deep in the dragon rare area, west of the demon world as usual, but he stayed alert. Armed with the godly energy of the king of greed, he saw the fragments of his imperfect memories. So, he roughly figured out what had happened to Mammon, the king of greed, a long time ago. Unknown stories, concealed facts. It was a thing of the past. Maybe it was just no more than an amusing thing of the past that had nothing to do with the present and the future, something that he should forget as a legend. The king of violence did not open his eyes. However, his alert consciousness had him raise his head and look to the south. He felt it instinctively. Godly energy, with which the king of greed once dominated the battlefield, told him something. The sin that had not appeared for over 1,000 years. The seventh king who disappeared, his greed has returned. He was now in the southern area. Chapter 184. King's Qualification. 2 days after Yongho returned from the auction house urgently, the Eastern Expeditionary Force, headed by Skull and its units, returned to the house of Mammon in the afternoon. "Are you back?" "Sure. How did it go?" Yongho and Ophelia giggled while exchanging greetings to each other. They could feel relaxed for now because the news about the King of Violence's advance into the south didn't reach them yet. Ophelia gathered intelligence much better than when she worked as the hostess of a tavern, but she didn't do it well enough to immediately find out what was going on outside the southern area. After welcoming Ophelia and other dungeon spirits back, Yongho got to the point even without having them take a break from their long journey. He talked about what happened at the auction house while they were moving. Various essences collected from the eastern area to the heart room where Lucia was located. "Really? You met the King of Fury?" "Yeah, to be precise, I didn't meet her. I just made eye contact with her. I don't think she noticed that I am the King of Greed." Ophelia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she kept her mouth shut for some time, as if she was lost in thought, then asked, making eye contact with him, "How did you feel about the King of Fury? What do you think she felt about you?" "Well, not bad. I only saw her face only briefly." Burring at the end of his words, he recalled the King of Fury. Her rainbow-colored eyes and fresh face came to his mind. At that moment, he turned his eyes and saw Catalina walking side by side next to him. In no time, he said to Ophelia again, "Well, I felt like she was like Catalina. I'm not sure what she thought of me. She didn't know I was the King of Greed in the first place, and I didn't talk with her in the auction house anyway." Catalina blinked and flapped her ears at his reply as if she didn't know what he was talking about. On the other hand, Kaiwan narrowed her eyes as if she understood it. Ophelia grinned and said, "If so, I think my analysis is correct." Catalina became more puzzled now. Obviously, she was the main topic of their conversation, but she felt like she alone couldn't make head or tail of what was going on. Ophelia said, "Someday, it will be known throughout the demon realm that the King of Greed has returned to the House of Mammon. It means the opening of the era of the 6 kings. When that day arrives, the King of Fury is the strongest candidate to be your ally. There were as many as 7 kings in the demon world. With 7 kings and their territories, it was natural that they formed a temporary alliance of their own because it was impossible for any king to confront other kings as a group. Yong-ho, who recalled the Three Kingdoms game, asked Ophelia again, "Isn't it good enough to be close to the King of Fury?" Ophelia replied immediately, "Although the King of Fury is known as the warmonger, she is exactly the opposite. If my analysis is correct, she doesn't enjoy fighting. She only goes out to fight for the peace and well-being of her own people, because it's the fastest way to end the war." "Do you mean she is a pacifist, sort of? What she wants is not to seize the hegemony of the demon world, but to bring peace and prosperity to her people. Besides, she is sharing the borders with all the other 6 kings. She even has a border stretching into our southern area. Nowadays, there is a big turbulence in the northern area, so I think she needs an ally badly these days." Ophelia spoke so fast that Yong-ho and the others found it hard to follow her, but she hit the nail on the head. Reviewing her point in his mind quickly, Yong-ho nodded. Then he said in a low voice, recalling the King of Fury's face, "I wish I could be on her side. I don't want to fight her for some reason." "What do you mean?" Kaiwan asked, cutting in timely. "Like she did last night." Her eyes were glaring sharply. Catalina gently pulled his hand, as if to imitate Kaiwan's action. "We're almost there." Right at that moment, they reached the entrance to the heart room of the dungeon. Skull shouted loud as if to help Yong-ho, and opened the door. "Skull. The day I have been earnestly waiting for has finally come." Pounding, pitter-pat. "See, please give me essence quickly. I feel dizzy." As soon as Yong-ho entered the heart room of the dungeon, Lucia shouted, making a big fuss. Since they were also in the heart room of the dungeon spirits could hear Lucia's voice. Kaiwan whispered, shaking her head. "Isn't it right for you to follow your master when you choose words or speak in the heart room of the dungeon?" "Exactly," Tigrius replied seriously, and Ophelia grinned quietly. Yong-ho, who suddenly got embarrassed for no reason, cleared his throat, but Lucia was still cheerful. She shouted cheerfully without caring about Yong-ho's embarrassment. "I've not eaten anything for the past several days, waiting for today." After all, Yong-ho also burst into laughter. After receiving the essence from Eligos, he approached the heart of the dungeon. As if to reflect Lucius' mood, he pushed the essence into the wriggling heart of the dungeon. "Be sure to chew it." "Of course I will. Yum yum. Oops, so delicious." Lucia didn't exclaim artificially. Obviously, she admired it sincerely. Lucia was not the only heart of the dungeon. It was good to say that the heart room of the dungeon was Lucia herself. The dungeon spirits felt unusual energy. It was as if the whole room was wriggling. "Please keep supplying it to me, please," Lucia shouted, but her voice was a bit weird. Her voice trembled in ecstasy, as if she had drugs. At that moment, Yong-ho paused for a moment and looked back because he wasn't sure if it would be okay to keep injecting essence. At that moment, Tigrius shouted, "Now is a good chance. Don't stop. The efficiency rate of essence absorption has been doubled. It's a very rare occurrence, so don't miss it." Yong-ho, who thought of the double EXP of online games, immediately began to act. He injected various essences into the heart of the dungeon at high speed. Oh, so good. Wow. Even though he was so embarrassed because of Lucia shouting in ecstasy, Yong-ho did not stop it. Finally, when the essences harvested from the eastern area ran out, a bright light was pouring out from the heart of the dungeon. Wow, the brilliant light never hurt their eyes. Uriah, who followed Yong-ho with Baduk, innocently admired the scene with her eyes twinkling brightly. It was beautiful. It was a splendor reminiscent of the morning sunrise. Then the light disappeared. A hush descended over Yong-ho and the others. "Lucia, the dungeon has gone up by 3 levels. 2. I have taken control of the 3rd floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. I will immediately start taking control of the 4th floor. As the dungeon has leveled up, you can install new facilities. Intermediate bathhouse, advanced training ground, advanced workshop, advanced water and sewage facility, sleeping room, recovery room, mine with improved mining efficiency, refinery, cultivation room, arena, etc. can be installed. As the control of the dungeon increases, it is possible to manage and understand the dungeon more carefully. As found new veins, 1 silver vein and 1 gold vein. Both are located on the 3rd floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. 2. Currently, I'm taking control of the 4th floor. 1. When the control of the 4th floor is completed, You can use the equipment manufacturing facility of the Labyrinth of Greed. Timer. Wow. I feel the best right now. Lucia, who gushed like a machine gun, kept exclaiming in joy as if she was enjoying the lingering pleasure. Just as absorbing the essence was the highest pleasure for the master, the heart of the dungeon also felt the extreme pleasure in the absorption of the essence. After enjoying the lingering pleasure for some time, Lucia suddenly realized a strange fact. Yong-ho and all of the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon were glancing at her blankly. Right at that moment, Yuria, who had been watching her behind Skull, walked out. She said, presenting the beautiful colored pebbles, her precious treasure. "Do you like playing with pebbles?" Lucia blinked, and she soon realized that she blinked her eyes. Through the dungeon's perceptual abilities, she recognized herself and the heart of the dungeon that changed its shape. A girl with blue hair in a white dress was standing there. Since a large silver cable attached to her back was plugged into the floor, she couldn't move far, but it was obvious that she was a humanoid anyway. Lucia tried closing and opening her hands. She also moved her fingers, then jumped from her seat. Oh, I can play with pebbles. Oh, of course, I like it. From now on, I'll love it very much. Chapter 185. King's Qualification 2. Lucia hugged Yuria suddenly, which Yuria liked, with her eyes glittering. She could not help but burst into laughter because she met friends her age for the first time at the dungeon of the House of Mammon. In fact, both of them were only a year apart. Everyone laughed warmly at them, but Baduk felt jealous about Yuria, who was so happy with Lucia. Lucia's rapid growth resulted in more workloads of the dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon Skull, and its unit were dispatched to the construction site of a new facility. Farming, which was virtually suspended during their eastern expedition, was also urgent, so some members of the Skull unit headed to the Garden of Life. Under the command of the Dragon soldiers, who were reborn as veteran farmers, the Skull unit newbies held sickles and hoes. Elagos and Ophelia were also busy. They needed a manager to take care of developing the new silver veins and other veins. Ophelia had to even design the water and sewage facilities. Flushed with excitement, Bergrim started to inspect the facilities on the 4th floor. The orc blacksmiths, who had been reassigned as Bergrim's disciples and direct subordinates, trembled at the joy of seeing the upcoming new facilities while feeling terrible at working through the night. Yong-ho also had a job to do. Fully prepared, he headed for the arena with Catalina and Kaiwan. 24th floor of the arena. Behind Yong-ho's back lay Troll Mountain King, whose head was about a dozen meters high. The blue-skinned guy's body was covered with various ores, so despite being naked, it boasted of his powerful defensive power as if he was wearing iron armor. Because of this, Yong-ho cracked the neck of the guy, which must be soft. It wasn't that difficult for him to cut it because its neck was also big, just like his body. Mountain King wasn't just a giant with high defensive power. Like a troll, the guy had a tremendous ability to regenerate, and it was raising parasites capable of casting attribute magic. Since it was not enough to cut the neck once, Yong-ho went into the body of the Mountain King and burned all its internal organs. Thanks to the Shield of Distortion, Yong-ho could stop its attribute, magic and gastric juice, but the gas in its stomach was a problem. Barely avoiding being suffocated, he took a deep breath several times. Man, I almost died. The arena changed, starting with the 20th floor. Of course, one thing never changed, namely the appearance of a stronger floor master every time he took over a floor. But the penalty in case of defeat and the emergence of the floor master were significantly different from those below the 20th floor. First, the penalty became heavier. It wasn't just the penalties that required the challenger to become a spirit of the arena in case of defeat. In the event of defeat, there was a penalty that required the loss of a dungeon spirit, as well as half of the loser's mana. And the lineup of the floor masters became more colorful. Up to the 19th floor, floor masters almost as tall as humanoid or humans appeared. But from then on, not only giants these days, but also monsters reminiscent of dragons appeared. Previous masters of the Mammon family also appeared more frequently. Well, the process is difficult, but the rewards are better. Yong-ho absorbed Mammon's mana. He didn't feel like his mana was growing rapidly like before, but it definitely worked. Every time he absorbed one, he felt like his mana became pure. His mana, which rapidly increased through the absorption of the essence, was as good as rags. Although he devoured it with the power of greed, he didn't digest it properly. But Mammon's mana solved this problem. Each time Yong-ho got mana, it closed the gap between different essences and filled the gap. The clear rewards of the 24th floor was an elixir that restored all abnormal conditions and restored stamina and mana. There was golden water in a very small glass bottle, like a medicine for an eye bottle. Damn it, it rips me off, man. I never expected getting an elixir on the 24th floor, Gusyeong mumbled with a happy look. Yong-ho carefully kept the elixir in his pocket, then hurried to the special seats where Gusyeon, Armon, Catalina, and Kaiwan were waiting. So, the king of gluttony is going after you, and I feel like the countdown has begun. Yong-ho nodded softly. Catalina and Kaiwan, who was next to him, were warming up to challenge the arena. Gusyeon gently patted his chin and said, grinning suddenly, "You said when you faced the king of fury, your power of anguish grew stronger, right?" Catalina and Kaiwan rolled their eyes at the same time. Yong-ho quickly looked at the weapons that the two were holding. He did it almost instinctively. Gusyeon continued with a hearty laugh. "Just kidding, man. Oh my god. It's amazing to find my dear Kaiwan has changed like this. You too, escort knight." Kaiwan turned her head, a bit sullen as if she was embarrassed, and Catalina pouted her lips. Amon said, "Our little master's power of anguish has become stronger. Tell you, it's a joke." But that's true. Catalina and Kaiwan looked at Amon sharply again. Yong-ho looked at Amon, feeling betrayed, but Amon was silent. Gusyeon quickly stood up and changed the topic, smiling slyly. "Anyway, it's just good. I told you already that the guy who guarded the 5th floor was Sagittarius, right? I mean our inflexible knight Asclepius." "Yeah, you did. So what?" Yong-ho hurriedly responded to Gusyeon. Gusyeon winked at him slightly and said, "The 5th floor is his armory. It's a perfect place for him to confront his enemy Gusyeon. You must be a trickster." Yong-ho, who hid himself behind the wall, cursed at him. Even at this moment, dozens of arrows of light kept striking the walls ruthlessly and penetrated the passages between the walls. There was something special about the arrows, let alone the arrowhead and arrow shafts. The arrows, literally flying like light, exploded every time they collided with the wall. The noise of the explosion was so big that Yong-ho could hardly hear anything. So, he once again cursed and recalled what Gusyeon told him. Sagittarius Asclepius, the Knight of the Sun, has a proud and honorable guy like his name suggests, though he is a bit too brusque. If he runs into you, he might express due manners to you like a noble knight. Actually, Asclepius was the opposite. When he ran into Yong-ho's party, he reacted very shortly. All of a sudden, he fired arrows of light. "Master Yong-ho, block it." Several voices rang at the same time. It was because the arrows, which had only been flying straight ahead, started to turn the moment they passed the wall. Yong-ho hurriedly stretched out his hands and created a shield of distortion. Catalina, who was right behind him, looked over the shield at Kaiwan on the opposite wall. Like Yong-ho, Kaiwan also protected Elagos and Ophelia by opening a shield of distortion. Kayaya Akang. The arrows of light hitting the shields of distortion exploded in succession. Regardless of Yong-ho and Kaiwan's efforts, the shields of distortion shook wildly. Yong-ho reinforced his mana and signaled to Kaiwan. Like his familiar spirit, Kaiwan immediately read his intention and nodded. Both of them signaled to each other with their eyes, then hit the ground at the same time. It was a passage 3 meters wide. Yong-ho and Kaiwan created a barrier together. It would have been impossible if their relationship was just routine. But it was also possible to mix their power because both of them had a tight bond as a master and his familiar spirit. The large and thick shields of distortion stopped the arrows of light more smoothly. Yong-ho saw Centauros sitting in the middle of a large room beyond his blurred vision. Once again, Gusyeon's words came to his mind. "I might speculate this, but don't worry if he runs wild. If you obtain the fresh green armor from Mammon's armory, you can negate most of his arrow attacks." Well, I think that must be the fresh green armor. The lower body of Centauros was a nice black horse, and its upper body was a knight in green armor. The green armor seemed to be made of tree trunks and leaves. Thin stalks were placed all over the armor, like vines on the wall, and wide-grown leaves were stuck on his shoulders and chest. What Gusyeon told Yong-ho proved all wrong. Asclepius, the Knight of the Sun, was insane, and the green armor that could negate his attack covered his body. It wasn't possible for Yong-ho to talk with Asclepius now. Moreover, Asclepius didn't seem to stop being a mere threat to him. Like Baphomet on the second floor did, he tried to kill Yong-ho's party swallowing. Yong-ho rolled his eyes. Because of the explosions caused by the arrows of light, his eyes were blurred, but he could easily see several corpses scattered throughout the floor. Most of them were probably the past dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon. Maybe one of them might be a previous master of the Mammon family. It was the moment for Yong-ho to make a decision. Chapter 1A6, King's Qualification 3, Clenching his teeth. Yong-ho looked to the left and right with glaring eyes. Then he conveyed his intentions to his dungeon spirits. Kill him. I'm going to give up. Asclepius, kill him, who became a madman. Yong-ho grabbed the air with his right hand. Stretching down Aemon that arose from the flames, he stared at Asclepius over the shield. He counted the numbers deep down. He moved his hands with Kaiwan at the same time and deactivated the shields of distortion. Then he pierced in the air with Aemon repeatedly. There arose a strong wave of green flames. It was not for the purpose of killing him. He planned to block Asclepius's vision with the green flames even for a moment, so his dungeon spirits could rush toward him. He could carry out such a plan because the green flames of greed could identify Yong-ho. The raging green flames quickly engulfed him like a beast. Eligos and Ophelia also awakened their beast nature. Kaiwan and Catalina threw themselves into the flames without any fear, and at that moment, the waves of the green flames were split in two. They were scattered into two groups, but perfectly united as one, as if heaven and earth were separated. Right at that moment, Yong-ho saw Asclepius splitting the green flames with the sword of the sun. He was a maniac, but at the same time, he was one of the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon. The next moment was compressed, then another moment came. Asclepius' horse hooves hit the ground hard. While holding the sword of the sun in his left hand loose, he took the giant spear in his right hand at the same time. Then he charged into the lingering green flames. It was a tremendous lance charging. Asclepius' giant spear, which reached the highest speed when he moved only 3 steps, aimed at Yong-ho's chest. However, Yong-ho wasn't an easy target. It was because the moment he noticed Asclepius rushing toward him, he also started moving. His giant spear pierced the air. Yong-ho and Kaiwan flew on the left and right sides, not just content with merely avoiding his attack. Kaiwan twisted her body and swung her whip sword. The moment Yong-ho stepped on the ground, he twisted his body hard. Then he fired the green flames with Aemon loaded with centrifugal force, aiming at Asclepius' exposed back. Kaiwan's whip sword coiled around Asclepius' right arm. The green flames engulfed Asclepius. Then, Kaiwan floated into the air. It was Kaiwan who caught him, but it was Asclepius' Herculean force that turned her upside down. Kaiwan did not lose her whip sword. Yong-ho also did not attack Asclepius, who twisted after hitting the ground. It wasn't just Yong-ho and Kaiwan who were here. Skull-riding Bucephalus struck him with a hammer all of a sudden. Asclepius hurriedly lifted the shield on his left arm to block the hammer. But he could hardly stop it in the first place. Not only Asclepius' left arm but also his whole body was pushed back. Seizing the moment, Kaiwan regained her balance. Instead of being thrown on the floor, she climbed behind Asclepius' back and let go of her whip sword without any regret. Then, she pulled out the devil's nail from the back of his waist, which Citri obtained for her, and stabbed it between Asclepius' armor. Then she twisted the nail inside it. Cool whack! Asclepius screamed in pain for the first time. He ran around violently and lifted the crossbow attached to his right hand. But nobody allowed for his next attack. Skull swung the hammer again, and Eligos and Ophelia also charged at him at the same time. Catalina also drew a moonlight sword and ran fast, keeping low as if she was stuck to the ground. Their attacks synced with each other perfectly. When Skull's hammer pushed Asclepius back again, Kaiwan stooped low on his armor and pierced between the armor with the devil's nail. Ophelia's sharp horn broke Asclepius' right hind leg, while Catalina's moonlight sword cut his left leg. Eligos punched his fist toward Asclepius's back, who was losing his balance and collapsing. His punch that passed over Kaiwan's head, who lay flat, showed off its terrifying destructive power. This time, Asclepius moaned silently. He was thrown toward the wall like a marionette that was completely broken. At that moment, Kaiwan, with her eyes closed tightly, created a wall of distortion between herself and Asclepius, then blew herself away. The hand of the black giant, created by Catalina, grasped her floating in the air. Asclepius, flying nearly 10 meters above ground, collided with the wall. The ceiling and floor shook. Eligos, who just blew a strong punch, let down his arms with a rough breathing. Skull turned around and glared at the wall where Asclepius collided, and Catalina hastily let Chwiryong down on the floor. Young-ho took a step. Asclepius' look was revealed as the dust disappeared. Centauros, with both legs broken, was pulling a big bow, sitting halfway down on the floor. Although his body was mangled by Eligos' attack and Chwiryong's devil curse, his arm that pulled the bow did not shake. Asclepius was a knight of the sun. However, the sun did not exist in the deep dungeon. His various divine powers, which were activated only under the sun, could not exert power. But he was still Mammon's knight. Even at this moment when he was dying as a madman, he was pulling the bow without any trembling, which testified that he really was Mammon's knight. Armin whispered something to Young-ho. Armin did not beg Young-ho to save Asclepius, formerly his faithful friend. Armin knew that Asclepius could not be saved anymore. The faithful knight of the sun should have died that day with the king who was his son. The king's considerations for saving his life rather ruined his life now. Young-ho grabbed Aemon. Catching his breath, he focused on the flow of mana. His dungeon spirits respected his intentions and stepped back. Asclepius let go of the bow and shot a golden arrow as bright as the sun. Young-ho hit the ground. He read the flow of his mana. The moment the arrow left the bow, Young-ho predicted the path of the arrow and ran without hesitation. An arrow brushed against Young-ho's cheek. The tip of Amon's spear pierced his green armor and then his chest. Young-ho did not create the green flames. Asclepius' heart, pierced by the spear, had been already broken since ancient times. Asclepius felt Aemon and sensed Young-ho's greed beyond him. His lips were wide open. For the first time since he met Young-ho, he began to speak. He said in a squeezed voice, "You have saved the demon world, my king." That was it. Asclepius couldn't say anymore. The knight who lost his master and lived like a shell for 1,000 years finally died. A new light came from the magic field on Young-ho's left arm. It was a brilliant orange symbolizing honor, the power of Asclepius. Asclepius' body collapsed like ashes. Young-ho saw the images of Asclepius transmitted at the last minute. The king climbed the stairs alone. No one could follow him. They just had to say goodbye to him for good, who they had always followed. Asclepius was in despair. He cried at the fact that his king died and that the king no longer existed in this world. Contrary to the king's intention, he died slowly in self-destruction for 1,000 years. Young-ho's images of him disappeared. However, other memories emerged in his mind, one after another. Chwiryong called Mammon's name, crying bitter tears. Skathash also cried. Next to him, Citri said goodbye to Mammon while hugging. Alone, Mammon chose to die alone to save everyone. Mammon was climbing the stairs. When the 12 spirits of the house of Mammon saw the king for the last time, they only saw his back as he climbed the stairs. What was there at the end of the stairs? Mammon climbed. Why was the last fight involving Mammon and his 12 spirits not known to the demon world? My king who saved the demon world, just because he possessed the sin and wonder, can he be called a king? It was Aemon's voice, not Asclepius, that came out last. Young-ho looked down at Aemon. However, Aemon, the magic spear of the red lotus, still refused to answer. It became a ray of flame and hid itself. Young-ho did not pressure Aemon. There were things that he could find out without doing so. Mammon saved the demon world, but that was it. His action did not affect the present. That was why Armin and other dungeon spirits hid what had happened to Mammon from Young-ho. After all, there was nothing that would harm Young-ho himself. Young-ho thought to himself that he would wait, waiting for the time Chwiryong mentioned to him, and he thought it was coming quite soon. It felt that way. Skull. Skull. He heard Skull's voice above his head. It was laughing loud, as always. Just by looking at it, Young-ho felt like he got a load off his chest. He quietly looked down at Asclepius' relics, the sun sword, the green armor, the unknown crossbow, and the big archery. After a brief silence on the faithful knight, like Chwiryong said, he turned around. He saw his dungeon spirits. He laughed out loud on purpose. Then he clapped loudly and said, "Let's go and collect the booty as much as we can." Skull chuckled again. Catalina fluttered her tail, and Kaiwan nodded happily. Eligos and Ophelia opened the door of the armory. Tigrius, who did nothing in the fight against Asclepius, lighted the dark armory with a magic light. Lucia said, "I will start taking control of the arsenal." Mammon's armory was now taken control of by a new master. Chapter 187, Encounter 1. The core of the dungeon was its master. So, when the master died, the soul of the dungeon also died. The dungeon, where the dungeon's soul died, could not perform its various functions. Even if the dungeon itself survived, it dried up before long because the supply of mana was cut off. Therefore, in dungeon battles, it was as important to defend the master to protect the heart of the dungeon. It was for this reason that the master's room was usually near the heart of the dungeon. The master was supposed to be protected in thorough defense against any outside attack. However, ironically, the master who was protected like that was often the strongest power of the dungeon. It meant that the master often had to hide the most powerful weapons without ever using them. When applied to a chess game, the master was like a mix of king and queen. Although he was the strongest horse that could crisscross the enemy line, he would lose the game when his horse died. In a way, it was like a double-edged sword. The king was no exception. The country ruled by each king could be called a huge dungeon, a collection of dozens of dungeons. The king was the country's most powerful force. Compared to modern warfare, the king could be compared to a tactical nuclear weapon. Therefore, the movement of the kings was important. Depending on where the king was located, the situation of the war could be affected. In some cases, the king hid himself thoroughly, like the king of lust, and in other cases, he kept his enemies in check by engaging in the fight actively, like the king of fury. The king of gluttony used to prefer the king of lust's method to that of the king of fury, but this time, he had no choice but to follow that of the king of fury, because the military force of the Dragon Legion, dispatched by the king of violence, was so powerful. The king of gluttony, who redeployed to the southern border about half of the troops deployed on the border with the territory of the king of envy, exposed himself. The king of gluttony's troops, led by giant beasts, caused fear among lots of people just by advancing to the front line. The people of the king of gluttony, who were alarmed by the army of dragons that had suddenly approached them, regained a sense of stability amid fear. They even praised the king of gluttony, saying he was the strongest king. However, the king of gluttony, leading the army, was not satisfied because the size of the dragon corps was so huge beyond imagination. Flying monsters such as wyverns and drakes, which comprised most of the dragon corps, were not a problem to him. Although they numbered thousands, he didn't feel like they were a big threat. What mattered to him most was the dragons. There were too many dragons. Even one dragon could bring disaster on the battlefield. But there were dozens of dragons. There were 5 or 6 ancient dragons that were fully grown and had entered the mature stage of their power. Faced with dragons like this, it was natural that the king of gluttony was on edge. Of course, he had numerous minions, including all kinds of monsters. It was not because he was afraid of the dragon corps deployed at the border. What was most disturbing to him, and what angered him the most, was that he could not find the whereabouts of the king of violence. Shortly after the legion of dragons began marching, Dragon Rare, the king of violence's land, literally became an absolute fortress. Without the king of gluttony himself going there in person or sending his elite troops, any general reconnaissance force could not approach there to detect his exact location. Where was the king of violence now, after he sent the legion of dragons? Was he still stuck in his Dragon Rare? Or was he enjoying staying in the polymorph state, called the dragon's proprietary patent? Hiding the king's location was as much a powerful strategy as revealing his location. It was very annoying to face an enormous enemy in a situation where they did not know when and where the enemy would appear, and a very devastating force at that. Even his appetite could not soothe the anger of the king of gluttony. Even if he ate an awful lot of delicious foods, and even if he had sex with lots of beauties including apsaras, he could not calm down his annoyance. Why did the king of violence move now? Where the hell was he now? The king of gluttony felt a new appetite and rage. The southern area, the land he thought he could lay his hand on any time if he reached out. But the king of gluttony suppressed his desire. He had a little more patience. Now that the king of violence was posing a threat to him, he could not move into the south recklessly. Now was the time for him to wait patiently. He needed to watch the situation a little more. The king of violence, the king of gluttony, gnawed his teeth. He stared at the south, looking forward to the day when he would bite the king of violence's heart. The king of fury looked to the south. However, the direction he gazed at was somewhat different from that of the king of gluttony. She looked to the southwest, the territory of the king of violence. I wonder what the hell my uncle is thinking now. The king of fury, dressed in white, twisted her dark blue hair with her fingers. Contrary to what she expected at the auction house, there was no envoy or letter from the king of violence. Like the king of gluttony, the king of fury could not know what the king of violence felt inside. Chwiryong kept gulping, who insisted on wearing the armor of the yacha after returning from the auction house. With a tense look, she whispered to the king of fury, "Wouldn't the legion of dragons under the control of the king of violence make a surprise attack on us?" In fact, most of the yachas and asuras who were in charge of combat among the king's people had been deployed on the northern and eastern borders. In this situation, if the dragon corps located in the south marched, the king of fury would helplessly collapse. It was the most terrible scenario for the king of fury and her people. But the king of fury shook her head violently. "No, I don't think he will. You don't have to worry about that. Rather, you should be prepared for the possibility that the king of gluttony will attack us." She wasn't just ranting like a child now. She believed in her own insight. The king of violence was still her ally. Chwiryong held her tongue at her resolute response. It was because she knew the king of fury's stubbornness. But she trusted the king absolutely. Chwiryong turned the topic. "I am still worried because the battle in the north is not over yet." The king of fury sighed. The war in the north was still dominated by the king of pride. If the war went on like this, the king of gluttony would be faced with a situation that she didn't want. Just thinking about the fight in the north made her annoyed. Whichever side won, it was clear that there would be a bigger war in succession. The northern area was now a big-time bomb. As the face of the king of fury clouded quickly, Chwiryong realized her mistake. She urgently tried to appease the king with comforting words. "I think our Kalavinkas, scouting all over the place, will bring you good news. That would be great," but it was like she kissed and stabbed at the same time, but the king of fury didn't care. Looking to the south a little more, she fidgeted with her hands habitually. Chwiryong asked, "By the way, master, what have you been drawing for some time?" "Huh." Chwiryong glanced at her hand, and she looked down at her own hand. She had a pencil in her right hand and a sheet of paper on her thigh. She was drawing something carelessly, and now there was a pretty good portrait in front of her eyes. The king of fury was embarrassed. The Gandharva race stood out in art as a whole. As the chief Gandharva, her painting skills were outstanding. Even though she drew it roughly, the portrait had a photographic precision. Approaching her already, Chwiryong looked down at the painting. "It looks handsome. It's a male face, right?" Yes, he is." The king of fury blurred awkwardly. Chwiryong narrowed her eyes at her awkwardness, and soon she noticed that the king of fury was mentally wandering around, looking for a place to go. Chwiryong thought for a moment, then she got startled. "Oops, is this the guy you met at the auction house? Then, is this an imaginary portrait? Oh my god! I didn't know you fell in love with him so deeply. Did you imagine your face just by looking at one of his eyes? Are you in deep love with him?" "This is not an imaginary portrait, I saw him directly." The king of fury replied hurriedly, then blushed before she knew it. Chwiryong asked again, "Are you talking about his bare face without the mask?" "Yeah, of course, I saw him only briefly." The king of fury regained her composure. Fanning off the heat on her face with her hand, she said, "Anyway, stop talking nonsense. I just drew his portrait to kill time." However, Chwiryong was still narrowing her eyes. Then she picked up the portrait. She examined it and said in a very serious voice, "The fact that he participated in the special auction means that he has a strong force of his own, or at least his own ability is excellent. It would be nice if he was not in the control of another king. Maybe he will be a great help to you, master. Do you think so?" Chapter 188, Encounter 2. The king of fury pricked her ears a bit. as if she was lured by what Kirtimuka just said. Kirtimuka laughed again at her response. Even as she lined up handsome Davana Gandharva guys in the field, her master never showed any interest in them. Given her track record like this, Kirtimuka never expected her master would show interest in a man. But her master was different this time. Right at that moment, a strong breeze blew through the large open window. Translucent white fabrics fluttered violently, and Kirtimuka had to close her eyes tightly, though briefly. But the King of Fury was different. She jumped up and greeted another friend of hers, Gardamundi. Appearing through the window was Garura, Gardamundi in red scale armor. With red feathers, wings, and bird-like feet, she traveled around the world and served as the King of Fury's eyes and ears, apart from Kalavinka's. Gardamundi happily waved her hand at the King of Fury, who welcomed him so friendly and jumped from the window frame and approached. Her Kirtimuka screamed angrily, "You're so rude. How many times did I tell you to come through the main gate to see our master?" She scolded Gardamundi severely like a Yacha woman, but she just ignored Kirtimuka's anger as if she got used to it. Obviously, the two growled at each other like cats and dogs. After all, the King of Fury quickly opened her arms to mediate between the two. Gardamundi knelt to pay respect to her and blinked. Even though she didn't express due manners, she again stood up suddenly. "Gosh, you wretched girl. Wait a minute. Isn't he the master of the Mammon family?" Kirtimuka's cursing and Gardamundi's voice were mixed. Quickly taking the portrait from Kirtimuka's hand, Gardamundi nodded in succession. "It looks like the man in the portrait was pretty much beautified, as if painted by a woman enchanted with a man, but I think he is definitely the master of the Mammon family." "Where did you get this?" she asked the King of Fury. "Master of the Mammon family. Tell me about him a little more. Do you know this man?" This time, the voices of the King of Fury and Kirtimuka were mixed. Gardamundi shrugged and said, "Sure, I know him. He's one of the targets I went out for reconnaissance this time." The King of Fury opened her eyes wide. Kirtimuka began to get nervous. Both were aware of the House of Mammon, but she needed to double-check. Gardamundi wriggled her eyebrows several times as if she felt strange about their reaction. She then said in an exaggerated tone as if she was an actor, "Yong-ho Cheon, the current master of the House of Mammon. He is a brave man who was not just content with rebuilding the ruined House of Mammon, but has unified the unclaimed land in the south." "Wow. Good. Weapons are overflowing here. See, I think not only Skull's unit members, but also the Black Orc Squadron members can arm themselves with these weapons." Lucia, who took control of the armory, spoke cheerfully. The inside of the armory was very simple. A large room with a high ceiling was filled with cabinets, and various weapons were stacked up inside the cabinets. Yong-ho felt as if he entered a big supermarket. Kaiwan, the descendant of the Mammon family like Yong-ho, puffed out her chest broadly. Then she said, with a bit of conceit and pride, "It's no wonder this place is amazing, because the eight-handed Baruna's creations are stored here." At that moment, Yong-ho laughed, recalling Kaiwan's armory. He gently closed and opened his eyes once to look at the mana inside the armory. It was so dazzling. Among the weapons that filled the armory, there really wasn't any single item that wasn't cast with spells. Tigrius, the most knowledgeable about magic among Yong-ho's party, picked up a sword nearby. He gently pulled it out of the sheath. He looked at the blade and said, "It seems that most of them seem to have been put in the magic of sharpening or material enhancement. If they are armed with these weapons, the combat power of the Skull unit will be terrifying. In fact, the Skull unit surpassed normal skeletons with the power of synchronization alone. So, if all of them were armed with magical weapons, they could be a formidable force that was a match for 100. Skull. With a hearty laugh, Skull raised his hand and pointed to the inside of the armory. At a glance, it was a place where special items, not typical items, were on display. Armor, one need armor. In fact, the composition of the current dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon was quite asymmetric because most of them were warriors who were good at close-range combat only. Comparing it with online games, it was a crude mix with no long-range dealers like a wizard or archer in the party, let alone a healer. Of course, Yong-ho himself or Kaiwan could attack the enemy at a distance with the green flames or a whip sword. There was also Tigrius, a wizard, even though there was only one. But it was not enough. Given that he was fighting with his dungeon spirits usually, he needed to find more long-range dealers and wizards for a more efficient party formation. Of course, I can't improvise the dungeon spirits because of that. So Yong-ho wanted armor. Since he could not make up for the insufficient spirits immediately, he had to find a way to utilize the existing forces as efficiently as possible. From his perspective, Yong-ho thought that he and his dungeon spirits had sufficient attack power, but their defensive power was weak, so much so that it was just so poor. Since there was no healer he could use at the front line, reinforcing the defensive power was more desperate. A dragon leotard. The first thing that caught Yong-ho's eyes was the red leather armor worn on a mannequin without limbs. In fact, it was armor in name only. It was so thin as to be called tights. He felt like it was even a swimsuit because it was an all-in-one with no limbs. However, it was armor stored in Mammon's armory. Its manner was unusual when Yong-ho felt it. Kaiwan, standing by Yong-ho, looked at the nameplate on the mannequin's neck and said with a smile, "It's made of dragon leather, although it is for women. It looks like it suits me or Catalina. I don't think it will interfere with my movement." "Who are you going to give it, Yong-ho?" Catalina pricked her ears at her seductive voice. Yong-ho replied with a smile, "There is one more suit over there. Both of you can wear it." Kaiwan frowned as she got the wrong answer from him, while Catalina was happy. Flapping her tail, Eligos raised his voice. "Oh, I found something suitable for you, master." Not only Yong-ho, but everyone in the armory turned to Eligos. Eligos, looking very pleased, pointed to the armor in front of him. All of them, without exception, gave an exclamation of surprise. The glittering light that seemed to have melted the moonlight caught their attention. Metallic dragon armor. It was an armor made of silver dragon scales and leather, very rare among dragons. "I think you have a discerning eye, Eligos, as the butler of the great house of Mammon. It is the item that ranks the highest among the equipment registered in the armory. Materials are none other than silver dragon leather, scales, and bones. Besides, brigada and various precious metals were added. The producer is 8-handed Baruna, as expected." While listening to Lucia's explanation, Yong-ho's eyes glittered. It was awesome, so much so that he recognized its value without her explanation. In this arsenal, there was no object that released more high-quality mana than the silver dragon armor in front of them. The silver dragon armor was worn on a mannequin like a dragon leotard. However, unlike the dragon's leotard, it had both arms and legs. There was no exposure of the bare skin, because it had silver armor on the black tights, Tigrius said. Most of these types of armor have detachable magic. When you activate the magic with the starting word, the armor is automatically dismantled and then wrapped around the owner's body and reunited. Like Iron Man, Tigrius narrowed his eyebrows at his question. Yong-ho giggled. Lucia spoke on behalf of Tigrius. "Since you have taken control of the armory, you are the owner of all weapons here, too. If you find out the starting word, you will be able to install it immediately. It is written here, starting word." As if she listened to Lucia, Kaiwan opened the nameplate attached to the neck of the mannequin and showed it to Yong-ho. Under the simple and clear name, Silver Dragon Armor, there was various information in fine characters, such as type number, material, etc. "It's so simple that I have to enter it again later." Looking at his bitter smile, Kaiwan egged on him to wear the armor. Standing next to her, Catalina's eyes also twinkled. "Skull, skull, even skull," urged him now. After all, Yong-ho couldn't wait any longer. After passing the nameplate to Eligos, he took a big breath. He said shyly, "Wear me." At first, it was a simple voice. However, some meaning arose from that voice. Yong-ho, who could see the flow of mana with his eyes, could directly observe the extraordinary happenings on the silver dragon armor. His heart was beating. The dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon nervously looked at the silver dragon armor and Yong-ho hopping on the mannequin. Right at that moment, they heard a strange noise. Payat. The clothes that Yong-ho wore were shattered into pieces with the noise. To be precise, his clothes were torn and scattered in the air. Yong-ho was embarrassed when he felt suddenly cold, and the dungeon spirits were even more embarrassed. It was only a second or so, but he became naked completely. Shortly afterward, mana was released violently in succession. The new black mana that entwined his whole body quickly became tights that stuck to his body. It was like the mannequin was wearing it. Only then did the silver dragon armor start to move. The silver dragon armor that was shattered into dozens of pieces quickly flew from the mannequin onto his body. Then they began to be reunited as he expected. Click, click. A pleasant metallic sound was heard in succession. Yong-ho straightened his back and soon felt a pleasant sense of bondage when the silver dragon armor tightened his body. Whew! Chapter 189, Encounter 3. At that moment, he let out a breath before he knew it. The silver dragon armor covered his entire body, except for the left arm armed with a magic field in his head. It was such a spectacle. But the dungeon spirits were still confused and embarrassed. Ophelia, who made eye contact with Yong-ho, gave a pleasant exclamation briefly, then held up her thumb with an awkward smile. He decided not to think about what she meant. That's great. Tigrius, who first came to his senses, spoke. Chwiryong giggled, and Catalina flapped her ears, blushing. Yong-ho focused on the armor. It was surprisingly light. He felt as if he was not wearing anything. Well, I feel like I'm wearing underwear. He moved his body one by one, starting with his fingers. Since he became a demon king, he had gained considerable Herculean power. But it seemed that he could now exert several times as much power as that. Is it a power armor rather than a simple armor? Reinforced armored suit. It was an equipment that not only protected the wearer, but it also reinforced his various abilities. In fact, there was nothing new, because most of the magic armor reinforced the wearer's abilities with magic. Yong-ho was surprised again when he tapped his chest hard, because he didn't feel any shock. So he knocked it a little harder, but he felt the same. Silver dragon armor disperses and absorbs the impact at the same time, Tigrius uncharacteristically explained in an excited voice. As someone who lived as a master for a long time, Tigrius had never actually seen a dragon armor, though he saw it in the old document. Seeing its performance before his eyes, he couldn't help but admire it. Wow! Yong-ho again moved his body back and forth. He was surprised for the third time, because he felt something weird all of a sudden. Tail. The big, thick tail down from the place where the tailbone was located shook lightly. It was an artificial tail made by attaching dozens of small pieces of metal in a row. Yong-ho tried moving his tail. As it was missing in a human body, Yong-ho might find it hard to move it, but surprisingly, he got used to it quickly. This time, he moved it hard. Given that it carried his power, it seemed that he could use it as an offensive weapon. When Yong-ho waved his tail, it was Catalina who was the most thrilled and happy. She also flapped her tail excessively. By the way, it suddenly came to my mind, while he was absorbed into demonstrating the functions of his silver dragon armor in front of the dungeon spirits, Yong-ho drew their attention. Turning to them, he asked, "Wouldn't I invite the dragon's grudge if I go around wearing equipment made of dragons like this?" I'm not really scared of their grudge, of course. A dragon wasn't just a monster. It was a tribe with intelligence. Just as ordinary people have an instinctive aversion to tools made of human bones, dragons would most likely feel the same when humans were wearing tools made of dragons. Maybe Yong-ho might invite their unexpected grudge. The King of Violence was also called the Dragon Lord. Of course, as he said at first, he wasn't really scared. It just came to his mind. Tigrius and Ophelia looked at each other, and as if by an unspoken agreement, Ophelia opened her mouth. "Well, you don't have to worry about such a problem. Dragons are complete giants by themselves. They don't care about even their little babies where or how they live once their hatchling days are over. And their life and death after that are their own, not anybody else." "Well, it's pretty dreary." Ophelia shook her head and said with a smile, "In a way, it can also be called respect of their own lives. But that doesn't mean they are just cold-hearted. Although it is rarer than other races, dragons are also aware of their own race. Dragons usually react to the appalling scene that they can't bear to see with their eyes open. The reason why equipment is made with dragon bones, leather, and scales is because they are the best materials. Even the dragons don't feel appalled at this kind of thing that Ophelia mentioned," Tigrius said. Picking up where Ophelia left, Yong-ho once again looked at the silver dragon armor. "Is this in that best equipment category?" That was true. It was the best armor in anybody's eyes. Nobody could make a mockery of this armor. According to Ophelia and Tigrius' explanation, even the King of Violence would not show any reaction to Yongho's silver dragon armor. Overall, you're right. But when it comes to the story about the armor, it's a bit different. A voice flowed from the red bracelet on Yongho's right arm, another form of Amon. Thanks to his continued strength, Aemon was able to talk to him to some extent outside the arena. Naturally, they turned their eyes at Yongho. Aemon whispered, "Young master, the silver dragon armor you are wearing is made of the bones and leather of the silver dragon Saga, the dragon rod of the day." Oh. Yongho gave out an exclamation automatically. Although he thought it was unusual, he never knew the armor was made of the Dragon Lord's bones and leather. Chwiryong clapped her hands and said, "I've seen it in a storybook. The fight between Mammon and the silver dragon, I know it too. It was a tremendous showdown where the heaven and earth shook," Catalina chimed in. The story of Mammon and his 12 spirits was a legend in the demon world. All the other dungeon spirits nodded, as if they also heard the story. Yes, that's right. It was a fight that lasted for 3 days and nights. Yongho could naturally imagine the battle between the giant silver dragon and Mammon. It seemed that his dungeon spirits also imagined the same thing. Chwiryong even gulped. After that battle, Mammon fought almost all of the remaining members of the Silver Dragon family. That's why the Silver Dragon clan was virtually extinct. Was it the revenge of the Silver Dragon clan who lost their master? No, that's not true. As the young master's dungeon spirit explained, dragons seldom get even with the enemy, even if their leader is killed. Why did the Silver Dragon clan attack Mammon? Why did they fight until their clan was annihilated? Armin didn't answer right away. Somehow, he felt like he was hesitating for a moment. Then he whispered, "Mammon made bags and accessories from part of Saga's leather and presented them to Elune and Citri. So maybe there are a few left in Elune's room on the bottom floor. Citri might still be keeping them even now." Yongho blinked. So did Chwiryong and Catalina. Ophelia and Eligos looked at each other. Tigrius cleared his throat and said, Silver dragons were a race of honor." Tigrius came up with a fantastic explanation. Mammon also knew the cause belatedly and regretted it greatly. I see. Yongho suddenly felt sorry about the silver dragon armor. He cleared his throat like Tigrius did, then changed the topic again. He allowed the dungeon spirits to freely choose the equipment they liked. "Shall I give the fresh green armor to Rickham? I think it would be better for Catalina to use the sun sword with her moonlight sword." Yongho took a step back and watched them search for their items. After some time, Amon, who had been silent, called Yongho again. "Young master, if you occupy the next floor, you will have half of the Labyrinth of Greed. You have already owned half the arena." In a way, Amon didn't have to remind Yongho about it. However, there must be a reason why Aemon brought it up in this place, not in the arena, by consuming a lot of mana. It seems that the day when I will call you master, and thus reveal the truths of the past that you want to know, is not far off. Amon. Yongho felt Aemon smile. Then Aemon whispered, "The owners of the 6th floor have the exact power that you need. If you make good use of their power, you will be able to rise to a higher level with your current power. Owners. There are 2 owners on the 6th floor. A Gemini, Yuho and Yuan, of Yin and Yang. Their strength is harmony. Please tell me a little more." "I don't have any more to tell you. I just observed him. And I just gathered rumors getting around in the tavern." Gardimundi shrugged and rubbed her red hair. Kirtimuka didn't like her rude behavior, but forgave her for now. She quickly turned to the King of Fury and said, "Although it was despised because it was an abandoned land, you can never ignore the vast size of the unclaimed land in the south. But this man has unified the whole land there. If we can have a good relationship with him, he will surely be of great help to our people." The King of Fury curled her lips and responded, "Good relationship. Yes, good relationship. Isn't it good for you because he is not under any king now? I think we had better hurry up to have him on our side." Kirtimuka got his face closer to the King of Fury and said, "It seems he has a great character, given that he not only recovered the bodies of the killed in the battle, but also compensated their bereaved families. I feel like he is going to be a great king." The King of Fury nodded on impulse but sincerely. It was no exaggeration to say that she was the only king who cared about the welfare of the killed soldiers' bereaved families. Then there appeared another man. Even though the House of Mammon collapsed, he is the master of the prestigious Mammon family with a long history and tradition, so I think he is in the same league as you. Of course, the House of Mammon has been resurrected now. Having said that, Ketemuka winked at her. The King of Fury, who already read her mind well, quickly pushed her aside and said, "Hey, don't talk nonsense anymore." Contrary to her rebuke, her cheeks were burning red. Besides, her earlobes were also red, and her mouth was strangely turned up with a smile. Ketemuka laughed openly, even though she fell on her buttocks. Once again, the King of Fury squeezed her lips and looked at the portrait of the master of the Mammon family she painted. Watching her quietly, Gardamundi thought, "Let me hide the rumor that he is a womanizer. Its credibility is low anyway." The King of Fury raised the portrait and smiled shyly before she knew it. The King of Violence raised his head. He wasn't mentally alert now. His body, which would reach hundreds of meters in length, moved directly in decades. The giant dragon's eyelids shook off the weight of years. One person was reflected in his golden eyes, which caused fear in those who looked at them. After raising his head, the King of Violence raised himself up. He looked down at the visitor from high above. Although he invited this visitor, he didn't expect the visitor would appear. "It's been a long time." His small and low voice was amplified. The breathing of the Dragon Lord, who inherited the fantastic vein, became magic itself. The room where the King of Violence stayed was filled with the great king's mana. The visitor looked up. With his black robes letting down, the visitor looked straight at the King of Violence. The visitor acted proudly. Even though he faced one of the 6 kings who ruled the demon realm, he showed no fear or embarrassment. The King of Violence made eye contact with the visitor. With respect, he called the visitor's name King of Sloth. Their eyes crossed once again. Chapter 190, Rude Awakening 1. The news about the King of Violence's military provocations reached the house of Mamon Yong-ho, and Ophelia decided to take it as good luck. Faced with the real threat of the King of Violence right now, it was very unlikely that the King of Gluttony would attack the southern area. Instead of being in a hurry and impatient, Yong-ho set into motion his action plan one by one. He moved the entire living facilities on the first floor to the first floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. The original place of the facilities was filled with the dungeon defense facilities. He also moved the heart room where Lucia was located to the 5th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed. Although he felt sorry for Yuria, who just made friends with Lucia, who was also very disappointed, it was inevitable. The heart of the dungeon had to be kept in the safest place. It took some time for him to move the dungeon facilities and establish a new defense facility. In the meantime, he carried out the evolution of the dungeon spirits that he had postponed. The Skull Unit, which brought a lot of achievements in its eastern expedition, had many members eligible for promotion. Thanks to their synchronization, its skeleton soldiers and skeleton warriors carried out excellent performance as skeleton warriors and skeleton knights respectively. So the Skull Unit's combat power greatly improved through several promotions of its members. In the case of general dungeons, when the dungeon grew and brought in stronger dungeon spirits, the existing spirits were usually abandoned because most of them were much weaker than their new counterparts. However, thanks to the power of evolution, no dungeon spirit at the House of Mammon was abandoned, for they also grew together with the dungeon. After evolving the Goblin Rangers to the point that they had little traces of goblins except for their green skin, Yong-ho stretched himself. Although he evolved hundreds of dungeon spirits until now, he had some other work to do. How about taking a break without overworking yourself? Kaiwan sat on the armrest of his chair and put her hand on Yong-ho's shoulder. He felt he was working too much, like Kaiwan said, but he couldn't delay again. He said, gently pushing her away, "Because time is gold, well, if you think so." Unexpectedly, she gave up. Easily then stood beside other dungeon spirits. They were lined up, facing his chair. Everyone can get a promotion except for Skull. Their promotion was overdue because all of them got promoted a long time ago. Regrettably, it was impossible to evolve Skull through combination magic. It was because Citri couldn't find a suitable necromancer. Undead Skull laughed loud as if it didn't matter. In fact, Young-ho felt he didn't need to hurry because he evolved Skull into a Dragonbone Knight only recently. Let me do something about Catalina first. When Young-ho called, Catalina, who was standing next to Skull, came along. Her current position was Shadow Mistress. Young-ho promoted her to Shadow Queen by activating the power of evolution. On the surface, Catalina, who was standing at the place where the radiant green light disappeared, did not change significantly. However, Young-ho, who could see her and her manner directly, felt a marked difference. And there was somebody who noticed a subtle difference too. Well, I wonder if that's what Young-ho prefers. I hope he can change me like her. Since she noticed that Young-ho could change one's appearance with the power of evolution as he wished, Chwiryong cracked jokes like that whenever she had a chance. Eligos, who was the next one after Catalina, approached him anxiously while Ophelia giggled. So, she only moved her lips to convey her intention to Young-ho silently. Well, yes. That way. When Young-ho responded naturally, Eligos flinched. He looked back and asked, "Promotion? In getting promoted, right? Don't worry about it, it'll get you one." With Eligos being tense and anxious, Young-ho promoted Eligos by activating the power of evolution. Now promoted from Red Demon Tyrant to Red Demon Genocide, he had a hairy chest and wild look. Ophelia was happy about the outcome of her promotion. She was promoted from Red Demon Breaker to Red Demon Champion, and Tigrius was promoted from Wizard to Warlock. Chwiryong, who went through evolution after becoming Young-ho's familiar spirit, got a promotion for the first time, so she was rather uncharacteristically nervous and tense this time. Young-ho, who felt the urge to tease her, put his palms on her cheeks. Then even before Chwiryong could begin to complain, he activated the power of evolution. Her hair, when she got promoted from Sword Queen to Sword Empress, turned a little more like a flame. She laughed after checking herself as a whole. Oh gosh, how can I get this plastic surgery without any side effects? I think I am blessed with a man. Young-ho turned away from her with an effort, then pondered over whether to evolve Skull. Since they repeatedly went through evolution and promotion, the dungeon spirit's EXP accumulation slowed down a lot. Since Citri said she would get him Necromancer Undead within a few days, it might be better for him to postpone their evolution. Skull, Skull. As if it read Young-ho's agony, Skull shouted, showing both palms. It seems Skull wanted Young-ho to delay evolving him. Okay, take a good break today, everyone. We're going to start attacking the 6th floor of the Labyrinth of Greed right away tomorrow morning. Young-ho made the announcement, and each of the dungeon spirits moved to their room. Instead of standing up right away, Young-ho sat on the chair and looked at Armin, placed in the form of a bracelet on his right arm. He recalled what Amon said right after the attack on the 5th floor. They're really terrifying. The dungeon monsters that occupied the 6th floor were not comparable to those on the 4th or 5th floor. Not only the white-haired gorilla-shaped monster lesser demons that eat ogres, but also Cyclops, the one-eyed giant, and Stragos, the prince of the ghouls, who were not comparable with ordinary ghouls, came out in droves. However, when Chwiryong said it was terrifying, she didn't refer to the dungeon monsters. She was talking about the Skull unit slaughtering the dungeon monsters after they synchronized with Skull. As Young-ho expected, the Skull unit, armed with magical equipment on the 5th floor, really boasted of their tremendous combat power. They were no different from the unit with hundreds of skeleton knights. Given that they had the attribute of the tireless undead, they had a combat power strong enough to beat thousands or even tens of thousands of skeleton warriors. On the 6th floor, there were various living spaces, as well as a prison and a torture room. Although Eligos strongly expressed his desire of touring the place, he couldn't because of Ophelia, who had complete control over him. Eligos knew when to restrain himself. With Eligos feeling frustrated, they examined the whole 6th floor for a while. Finally, Young-ho's party reached Chwiryong's room next to the passage leading to the 7th floor. Since the Skull unit was in charge of the battle to take over the 6th floor attack, Young-ho and his dungeon spirits did not waste their physical strength at all. Skull and Eligos, at the order of Young-ho, who signaled to them with his eyes, opened a large steel door. Gemini Yuho and Yuen of Yin and Yang. There was little record about the duo, in particular among Mammon's 12 spirits. Ammon said the two were already dead, just like Elune and Baruna. However, Ammon also said that the duo might have left behind their surrogates with a high probability. The room, which looked about 10 meters wide and 20 meters long, was full of toys. Unlike other rooms so far, this room itself was equipped with a bed and other furniture as if it were a living space. Yong-ho first stepped into the room. Then, a soft light appeared on the chair at the end of the room. A pile of light that closely resembled what he saw in Elun's room in the past became united and formed a human shape. It was a boy and a girl sitting side by side. Hi. The boy, who looked a little over 10 years old, was dressed in black. His hair was gray and his eyes were blue. The girl sitting next to the boy was dressed in white. Contrastingly, her hair was black and her eyes were red. Both were a boy and a girl who were pretty like dolls. The boy and the girl opened their mouths before Yong-ho could even say anything. It's the first time anybody has come to this room with Aemon, the duo continued. You even have godly energy. Not all of the 12 spirits of the House of Mammon challenged their masters with battle-related tests. The boy and the girl beckoned to Yong-ho to come closer. When he and his dungeon spirits approached them close enough, they continued, I don't think you need a cumbersome test. If you can handle the power of harmony properly, you have already passed the test. The way they spoke to Yong-ho was far from childish. Both of them seemed exhausted. What was left in this place was the same replica of those that existed in Elun's room. Yu-ho and Yuan beckoned to Yong-ho again and asked them to stand in front of them. Yong-ho stood in front of Yu-ho and Yuan, and the two looked up at him. For the first time, they made a childish smile. You look like the master. Yu-ho and Yuan raised their hands at the same time and touched his godly energy, then transferred their power to him naturally. The power of Yu-ho Yuan was harmony. Amon once told Yong-ho that it was particularly important, unlike the typical power. The moment he accepted the power of harmony, Yong-ho knew it. He seemed to know what he had to do with his power, and why Yu-ho and Yuan said that dealing with the power of harmony itself would be a test. Yong-ho exercised the power of harmony. His power was not limited locally, but he let it engulf himself. He used it for everything he had. It was a vast power that made him feel dazzled. He felt dizzy. In the meantime, he maximized his senses. Then he found some familiar energies in no time.